Hello, this is Jungle Jim at your service. Welcome back to the Jungle Jim Bible Story Series. Today we're going to talk about Lesson 3. Ooh, and you'll never guess who we're going to talk about, but I'll get to them later. In our previous video, we saw how God started with really just water, created the entire earth. He made the fish, the birds, etc. But we really focused on how God made man and woman. He took dirt, if you will, formed the man's body, breathed into the man the breath of life, and voila, the man started speaking French. No, the man became a living being. And so God took a rib from Adam's side, as opposed to a rib from his head, I don't know, but took a rib, used it to form the woman. Eve was her name. And there you have it, the first husband and wife. Now, in this story, there are so many amazing things, but to me, the most remarkable is that in the story, the husband actually listened to his wife. Of course, afterwards, they were kicked out of the garden, and the man had to start working the ground, and with hard work and sweat and toil, get his food instead of just picking fruit off trees. And that started, but other than that, it went really well. Now, I recently received a tweet from a mockingbird regarding this story, saying, Jungle Jim, you mentioned that God created the entire earth, the universe, in 6 days. Do you really believe that? Well, as a matter of fact, I do. You see, not only is it described that way in Genesis chapter 1, it's what God said he did when he gave Moses the 10 Commandments. Now, for those of you who don't know, Moses was the leader of the Hebrews, the Israelites, when they were slaves in the land of Egypt. And through Moses, God did many signs and wonders, brought 10 plagues upon the land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh finally said, Moses, you and the people of Israel must go. Now, to make a long story short, God led the Israelites to Mount Sinai, where he came down on the mountain. Moses went up on the mountain, and there God gave Moses the 10 Commandments written on tablets of stone. Now, one of the commandments was to this effect. Now, Moses, I want you and the people of Israel to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, the Sabbath day is the very last day of the week. And so God explains. You see, on that day you are to rest. You, all the people, the strangers, the foreigners who live among you, even your animals, you're to rest that day, because that is what I did. Made the heavens, the earth, the sea, everything in it, in 6 days, and then rested on the 7th. Kicked back in my lazy God chair. Moses, you should see that thing. Oh, it is so comfortable. Ooh, and the cup holders I put in that. Ooh, I really outdid myself. Ah, yes. Now let's see. Where were we? Oh, yes. Don't kill people. So, yes, that is what God said he did when he gave Moses the 10 Commandments, and I believe him. It's proof enough for me. But I understand for many people that's not exactly proof enough. You've heard the numbers. Oh, the earth's millions of years old. Oh, see this thing right here? It's millions of years old. And so if the Bible were true, if God did what he seemed to say he did, the earth's only 6,000 or 7,000 years old. And so that's why people think, well, maybe God was speaking symbolically or something. Well, let Jungle Jim give you some food for thought, okay? First of all, there is a dirty secret to scientific dating methods. Insert joke here. Actually, don't mind if I do. I've got a good one for you. Why is dating a scientist such a bizarre experience? Because all their dating methods are experimental. Oh, Jungle Jim, I crack myself up sometimes. I never crack my wife up. Let's not go there. But anyway, yes, there's a dirty secret behind scientific dating methods, and that is simply this. Every scientific dating method has assumptions built into it somewhere along the line. Now, if you're a scientist and you know a scientific dating method that has absolutely no assumptions built into it, then by all means contact Jungle Jim, try and explain it to me, and then I'll make some sort of correction. But for the most part, scientific dating methods are like being in an algebra class, where your teacher comes to you and presents you this problem. Say you're in a park on a bench. Across from you is another bench, and on that bench is a large bowl with 10 bananas in it. You observe the bowl of bananas, and you notice that about every 15 minutes someone comes along and eats one. Now, how many bananas were in the bowl to begin with? Now, if you were in that class and presented that problem, you might say something to the teacher like, let X equal... How in the world am I supposed to answer that question? Now, I don't really recommend saying that to your teacher. It's probably a thought that's going to enter your head. But the problem is you can't answer it. You've got to have more information. What was was the bowl full of bananas when it was first set there? How long ago was it set there? Do people really come every 15 minutes and eat one? There's lots of questions that have to be answered. And the only way to come up with a definitive answer, with all these things being unknown, is to make assumptions. And assumptions are not facts. So when you hear the numbers, unfortunately, they never say, oh, this is 1,000,000 years old if you assume blah, 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 blah. No, they just say, oh, it's 1,000,000 years old, and leave it at that. Other food for thought. Adam and Eve, the first day they were created, how old were they? No, I'm not trying to be the algebra teacher, trying to throw you for a loop. Yes, they were 1 day old. Now, how old did they look? Well, we don't know. The 20s, 30s, who knows? They certainly didn't look like they needed baby diapers. They were husband and wife. Now, apply that to the earth. God creates it in 6 days, but how did it look? 6 days old, thousands of years, millions of years, billions of years? Pick your alien. We don't know. And so when I hear people say, oh, Earth is millions of years old, this is millions of years old, I really don't let that bother me too much. Really, it's rather quite liberating when you realize that God did what he said he did. Rather trust-inducing. But enough of that for today. So that's just some things to think about. Now, for lesson 3, Bible story 3, the Bible tells us that Adam and Eve had sons and daughters. We don't know any of the names of the daughters. We know the names of 3 of the sons. Now, Jungle Jim, I happen to know a 4th, but I'll tell you about him later. The first 2 sons that we know of are Cain and Abel. And so their story is found in... Okay, you'll have to forgive me and be patient with me. I have video dyslexia. There we go. Genesis chapter 4 and verse 1 through 16. Now, if you don't know this kind of writing here, let me explain. The Bible is a collection of books. It's a collection of writings. There are all types of different kinds of writings. Letters, sayings and writings of prophets, collections of song lyrics, collections of proverbs, stories, all sorts of different kinds of books. And Genesis is the very first one. And so after these books were written, mankind later decided that in order to look things up easily, we divide the books into chapters. And we'll take the chapters and divide them into little bitty segments, almost like a sentence or two a piece, a paragraph a piece, and we'll call those verses. We'll mark them with little numbers, call them verses. And so this means Genesis chapter 4, starting at verse 1, the beginning of the chapter, and reading through the end of verse 16. And so that's where this story about Cain and Abel is found. Now let Jungle Jim here, let me do a little reading, and we'll go from there. Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks. In other words, he was a shepherd. And Cain worked the soil, a good farmer. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. So, what do we see here? Well, Cain brings some of the best of his crops to the Lord, almost like a giant Thanksgiving basket full of who knows what, corn, zucchini, you name it, except for maybe tomato, because that's a fruit, or is it a vegetable? I don't know. Who cares? Lots of good crops he brings to the Lord. Abel brings some good hearty meat, shall we say, from his flock. And so God looks with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain's offering he has no regard. Now, this proves definitively, once and for all, that even God himself does not like vegetables. So why in the world are we putting those on our children's plates and saying you can't go outside and play until you eat all of them? Okay, I'm over that. Yes. Yes. Well, okay, yes, that is a good point. God doesn't exactly need vitamins, does he? It's okay, so maybe, yes, it is good to eat all your vegetables before you go outside and play. But regardless, God didn't like Cain's offering. And so he comes to Cain, and he says, why are you so upset? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door, kind of like a door-to-door vacuum salesman. Its desire is to have you, but you must rule over it. Now, this is wonderful advice from God. He's giving his outlook on life, his outlook for humanity. And yet Cain, he's probably there saying, oh, yes, I understand. But in his heart, he's not receiving these words from the Lord. That's because Cain suffered from two problems. One was he suffered from what I call husband syndrome. You see, husband syndrome is simply this, that when one hears good advice, he does not take it. That's because, well, it's a little bit of an overreaction to the whole listening to your wife and death starting thing. I mean, we still need to listen to good advice on occasion. The second thing was, and how shall I explain it? You see, Cain had a trust issue. It wasn't that he was atheist, wasn't agnostic, wondering, well, maybe God exists, maybe he doesn't. In fact, if you had been alive back then, had been able to go up to Cain and say, Cain, do you believe God is real? He would have looked at you and said, who are you and where did you come from? You didn't come from that, crazy doctor with the blue police box that was here the other day, did you? I said, oh, never mind. What do you mean, is God real? I just talked to him. And so Cain believed God was real, but he did not trust God. He trusted himself instead for his own solution, and he devised a wicked plan. He invited his brother Abel out to a field. Now, please listen to some sage advice from Jungle Jim. If you have a sibling and they invite you out into a field or some other very private place, and they happen to be carrying, I don't know, a machete, an axe, a club, not the sandwich, mind you, that's okay, a revolver, some kind of weapon, don't go with them. These things don't normally end well. And so, having saved many of you from certain doom, what actually happens? Well, Abel didn't have this sage advice from Jungle Jim, so he goes out into the field with Cain, and Cain was able to kill Abel, most likely with the cane. So there you have it. Cain murders his brother. Now, I don't know how Cain thought he was going to get away with it, because the next thing we know, God is talking to Cain, and he says, Cain, where's your brother Abel? Now, Cain illustrates, and this is a wonderful thing about the Bible. You read the Bible and you really see that human beings have always been human beings. And so here, Cain receives this question, where's your brother Abel? And instead of just giving an answer, he gives a quanswer. That means he answered a question with a question in order to avoid answering the original question. He says, am I my brother's keeper? Now, this is brilliant, Cain. Yes, the Lord, who created the entire universe in 6 days, formed your own body, all-knowing God, is going to be thrown into such confusion by your question that he'll never figure out you murdered your brother. Good luck with that. You might as well try and start your car by taking the car key and inserting it into the seatbelt fastener. Not that I've ever tried to do that. I'm just telling stories here. Don't read anything into them, okay? I'm just trying to communicate here. So yes, Cain answers God with this question, and God doesn't even bother to answer Cain's question. In fact, I will read to you what God said. So, the Lord, this is verse 10. The Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it would no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord said to him, now notice, Cain has murdered his brother, and yet God is about to show mercy. Not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Now this has been a great debate among many a person, many a theologian. What was this mark that God set on Cain? Was it a scar, a tattoo? Well, let Jungle Jim solve this mystery for you. No. The mark that put on Cain, it wasn't a scar, a tattoo, or a branding, anything to that effect. The mark that God put on Cain was Cain's younger brother. You see, Cain went around with Mark on his shoulders, and that way if anyone jumped out of the bushes to kill Cain, then Mark could just jump off his shoulders, and they could fight together. It'd be 2 on 1, and that way Cain would be safe. Now, it wasn't the best of deals for Mark, poor fellow, but at least he did get free transportation. And this does go to show that when one kills one sibling, it does tend to wreak havoc on the family. So, there you go. Mystery solved. Now, the New Testament, the writing, that portion of the Bible, where the writings took place after the life of Jesus, they're about Jesus and the things he did and things that happened afterward, and many letters about how to follow Jesus. Well, the New Testament talks about this story in a couple of places that I'd like to share with you now, considering the fact that I just talked about the story. See, seems like a good thing to do. The first is in Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 4. There goes my video dyslexia. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. There we read, "By faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith he was commended as a righteous man, when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith he still speaks, even though he is dead." Now, I hear what you're thinking. Oh, Jungle Jim, I understand now. Just like Mark was one of Cain's brothers, Faith was one of his sisters. And so by faith, Abel, he gave the offering to Faith. Faith took it to God, and God was so happy not just to see Abel's offering. He saw Faith, who was such a wonderful person, and so God was well pleased with his offering. Not exactly. Okay, I appreciate your effort, and let me say that I truly believe you do not have to be a theologian such as I to understand the Bible. In fact, as somewhat of an embarrassment to our profession, it was basically theologians who killed Jesus. Yeah. But no, this is a chapter, looking at the context, okay? This is an entire chapter about people who had faith. What is faith? Faith is belief, trust, and hope, all rolled into one. Kind of like a baby eating spaghetti, it's just all over, belief, faith, belief, trust, hope, faith. And so by faith, Abel presented his offering to God, and God was well pleased. Now, in contrast to this, we have 1 John, I'm getting better at this, 1 John chapter 3, verse 11 and 12. Now you say 1 John, wait, why did they call it 1 John? Well, there is a 2 John. In fact, there's a 3 John, and there's a 4 John, but it's not called 4 John, it's just called plain John, which kind of makes you wonder why 1 John isn't 2 John in the first place. But that's a little bit confusing. So let's just find a book with a 1, a space, and a John after it, and then you'll be doing really well. 1 John chapter 3, verse 11 and 12. "This is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another." Oh, that's so important. The most important things in all the Bible. Love God, love one another. Verse 12. "Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil, and his brothers were righteous." So, do not be like Cain, who's of the evil one. Who's the evil one? Satan, the devil, God's greatest enemy. And so, Cain followed his ways. Now, you might have asked Cain, do you believe Satan's real? He might not have ever heard of Satan. But he was following him anyway, because he was rejecting God. And why did he reject God? It comes back to the one thing. He did not trust God. Abel did. Cain did not. Abel was righteous. Cain was evil. Now, the question for us, for you, for me, do you trust God? If so, wonderful. If not, why not? What's holding you back from trusting the Lord? He loves you, and he wants us to love one another. This has been Jungle Jim at your service. And now, as part of my service to you, I will end this video.